Hello, friends. Welcome to the Ancient Health Podcast, where East meets West. I'm your host, Doctor Motley, and I have a very special guest with me today. He is the co-founder and the director of education for one of the best companies out there. It has one of the best magnesium supplements out there. Wade, thank you so much for joining us today. I appreciate it.
Oh, thanks, Dr. Motley. Great to be here. Thank you for having me on the podcast, and looking forward to dive into magnesium and a bunch of other topics.
Oh, definitely. I am really grateful because I know that when patients come in, not trying to go too far ahead in the conversation about magnesium, it's one of the main supplements that I'm usually giving patients. And when you came and produced one product that had 7 different forms of magnesium, I was like, to me, it was like a game changer. And I literally had thought like, why hasn't anybody done that? But you guys did that. And I can tell this is coming from a background when we read about your background, about how you're involved in health, how you're bodybuilding. And I like to hear about you and know about you and people out there to see where your insight has come from. So can you tell us a bit about what inspired you to get into this world of health and what made you pursue this path?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So I was a kid, grew up in Canada in a place called New Brunswick, which is right next to Maine. So if you know Maine, you know New Brunswick.
Yeah.
It's a pretty same, very rural area. And, played hockey and sports and athletics as a kid, like most kids do back there. And when I was 15, my parents moved to an extremely rural area. We were the caretakers of a private resort. So it was about 500 acres, 5 miles to my nearest neighbor. Beautiful place to go visit. Don't necessarily want to live there as a teenager. Concordantly, my sister was diagnosed with Hodgkin's disease, which is a form of cancer of the lymph nodes. And then eventually she went through the medical model for 4 years before she died at the age of 22. She was 4 years my senior. So early at that time, I got exposed to the fact that your health isn't a guarantee and your life isn't a guarantee. And I also, at that time, I was like, okay, well, I need to get healthier. So I had a kind of a, external version of what health should look like. So at the time, Arnold Schwarzenegger was the biggest star in the world. And he was, he's in bodybuilding contests and Mr. Universe and Mr. Olympia. And he was like, on television, and he was married to a kid. Like, he's had the American dream. So I was like, this program looks better than mine. And read his book, Bodybuilding Encyclopedia, and then Education of a Bodybuilder, which was his personal story. And inside that story, he outlined key elements that led to his success. And he said it was a positive attitude, hard work, and self-discipline. Well, everybody I knew there worked really hard. It was a little fishing village, and they worked in the industry, like a forestry industry, or they worked, almost everybody did some sort of really difficult labor. So I realized, well, hard work's part of it, but it's where that work's direct. Positive attitude, nobody had a positive attitude. And self-discipline, we didn't even know what the word meant. And all of those things are a requisite to be successful in bodybuilding. And he said he took those principles and applied them to the rest of his life. And that's how he became successful. So I said, well, hey, man, can't argue with the results. I'm going to experiment with that. So I built a little gym in my barn because it was 55 miles to the closest gym. So that wasn't going to work. So I was like, okay. So, it was kind of the Rocky IV where he's fighting the Russian, I had pulleys and benches, and had an old York dumbbell set that I'd saved up and bought with my money from my first job, like my first full-time job when I was 15. And I started lifting weights and reading books on bodybuilding and physiology and things like that. There was no internet in those days. So you had to go to the library and get these books, or wait months in advance to get a magazine that was like 4 months outdated or whatever. But those were the principles that I started advocating. Then when university came along, I decided I would go into exercise physiology and start learning a little bit more. But I was really disappointed with my university career in the standpoint that I can remember I was experimenting with high intensity training in my 4th year in my exercise. And I noticed I think it was 8 points drop in my resting heart rate. Now, at that time, they were saying that you could only improve your cardiovascular health or your resting heart rate stuff through aerobic training. And I was like, I'm not doing aerobic training. I'm getting this. And I went to my exercise physiology professor and I said, well, what do you suppose is causing this result? You're like, oh, it's just some anomaly. And I was like, this is not an acceptable answer. And so what I found at the university setting, there was a lot of compartmentalized information, but there was no understanding of how those parts work synergistically. So I left school and decided I was going to go follow people who were producing results. And I got involved in the health industry, working at virtually every single level of the industry, from being a consumer of supplements, then to be a sponsored athlete, then to working in retail outlets, stores, product development, like even in warehouses that shipped and delivered these things. And so I got familiar with every single aspect of the business. Eventually, I became a personal trainer. And after I won the national championship, I had the physical attributes. I didn't know anything about marketing. I had the physical attributes that marketed themselves, be the brand. And ended up moved to the West Coast, started my own retail store, as well as working a personal training business. And that allowed me to get the contacts and people. And then I got influenced because within a short time, I was training a lot of the most influential people in Vancouver. And you could never get access to these people, but they wanted what I had. And so that was a big lesson. If you have something of high value, people of high capacity will pay for that. And so I became friends with a lot of very influential people in a lot of different disciplines. And they were actually paying me to hang out. And I thought that was kind of cool. And I became friends. And many of them are still my friends today, my best clients. And they started to school me about education and business. And then in 2003, a couple of years before, I'd had a kind of a spiritual awakening, and I got into Eastern philosophy and meditation. And through that process, I decided, what if I'd left the bodybuilding industry because of the pervasive use of drugs. And it really was a race to not just who had the best genetics, but who had the genetics internally to survive the kind of drug usage that was exploding in the scene in the late 1990s and early 2000s. So I decided I would go into drug tested competitions came up, and I thought I'd go down that route. And I wanted to do it in a unique way because everybody said you couldn't be a bodybuilding champion on a plant-based diet. And I said, well, I'm going to try that to see if I can do it. Well, long story short, drug-free, plant-based, in a couple of years, I ended up winning another national championship and going to my first Mr. Universe contest in 2003. But I didn't have everything right.
Yeah.
After the contest, which was in Mumbai, India, I got back, and my business partner today, Matt Gallant, who was also a personal trainer, who was a ketogenic guy. So we were at odds in a lot of the philosophical ideas about how you get in shape, but he had a successful business and he was a great marketer. I didn't know anything about marketing. And so we collaborated. He says, Wade, I'm selling a bunch of courses and products online. The fact that you're a Mr. Universe plant-based guy, this is really weird, but it's weird enough that I think it'll get traction in the marketplace. Let's sell stuff online. What he didn't know is I said, well, that sounds crazy. Nobody's making money online. That's nuts. He goes, well, I am. And I'm like, right, whatever. And I said, I don't even own a computer. I was using internet cafes at the time to write programs. And so we decided we would suspend our disbelief, and we wrote a book that was the genesis of an education company, which ultimately led to the production of nutritional supplements. And so we got hit out of the gate. I'm probably the only person you'll ever meet that had a successful online internet marketing business and didn't own a computer. So never accept the limitations that may be present to you. And I think the first time I paid myself a few months after I bought a computer, I thought, well, I better buy a computer since I don't have one and I'm an internet marketer, I guess. So anyways, over the next 4 years, we coached about 15,000 people worldwide.
Wow.
We developed our very first nutritional supplement, which was Masszymes. I had met a doctor after. I should back up a little bit, because in 2003, after I did the Mr. Universe, I gained 42 pounds of fat and water in 11 weeks. And I had a real health crisis. And I met this doctor who was like a cast off of Cocoon or something, that movie with all the like the super centurions are living these like vibrant lives. And I said, yeah, this is, I want to be like this guy, because my industry, the bodybuilding industry, is not really producing health. It's producing high performance relative to muscle mass and body fat gain, but that's not healthy. There's elements of health within it, but at the highest level, any sport, you're sacrificing your health for performance. You know, whether it's football or baseball or basketball or any other sport, cycling, whatever sport you might gain at the highest levels, you're trying to maximize performance at the expense of your health. And I said, there's got to be a balance here. So over the 4 years that we coached those 15,000 people, I got to work with so many different individuals and so many different elements. I found there was a set of core fundamental principles that you could apply. So I came back, I did another national championship and went to the Natural Mr. Olympia that year, World Championships. And I realized, okay, you know what? I've got a sound set of principles that I can apply. I wrote some books. I did some consulting with some other big firms, got on the speaking circuit, that sort of thing. And a number of years later, as Matt and I's progressive development in the health and performance field, we rebranded our company under the term Bioptimizers, I guess, in 2018. So 15 years later, and it's been a rocket ride ever since. And the premise behind that was, we're going to make the very best nutritional supplements possible, regardless of the cost. And then we're going to see if we can market that to a select group of people who want excellence as a result. Because there's always a market for excellence. And I believe there's nothing more expensive than a product that doesn't work. Plus, with my 15 years at that point in the nutritional supplement space, I realized there was about 5% of the companies that were really great. They were founder-led. The founder usually overcame some health challenge, found the obstacles in getting the right thing that they needed for themselves, started selling to their family and friends, and built a company around it. This has happened over and over and over and over again. Yeah. And so we decided that we would follow that same pathway. Now, the challenge with that is it's a slower go. You can either, when you're building a nutritional supplement, you can either spend a little bit of money on a white label product with a mishmash of maybes. Maybe it works, maybe it don't. We don't know. And we're going to spend all our money on marketing and sell that. Or you can buy a really high quality product, reduce your available resources to marketing, and try and build a grassroots movement that eventually you can get the company big enough that you can spend more on marketing because you have enough wiggle room in order to do that through volume. And that's the pathway that we chose. We focus primarily on education and primarily on providing premium quality products. And I'll get into how do you determine that. And then the third thing was building like a following to that said, no, we want excellence. We want the best. We were both coaching, like I said, influential people that had the resources and that said that they were willing, or high motivation. And from that, we were able to develop, I think, first, probably the most effective digestive health suite on the market. Like Masszymes, we talked about, was our first product. That's been around for 20 years. We still have customers who have been on subscription for 20 years. If you
20 years.
Yeah, it's a real game changer. Especially people suffering from digestive health. And then we developed a bunch of other products. Magnesium came about specifically because I was in a very stressful period of my life. I was running 3 different companies, living around the world. And what happened is I was not sleeping right and I was getting stressed. I was not responding well to any kind of stimulants like caffeine or anything like that. And I was like, oh, something's not right. I did a series of tests. And my brain was like a 70-year-old man. And that wasn't good. And when I did my SpectraCell analysis, it says I wasn't getting enough magnesium. And I was supplementing with magnesium because I knew it was an important mineral. And I thought, well, is my body not absorbing this? I'm buying a good brand, it's a particular style. And I was like, what's going on here? So Matt and I, being the crazy experimenters we just bought every single magnesium there was available on the market. And we started doing experiments about, okay, there's a concept in orthomolecular nutrition. And orthomolecular nutrition was developed in the 70s by 2-time Nobel Prize winner, Dr. Linus Pauling, Dr. David Hawkins, and Dr. Abram Hoffer. All of those were legends in the nutrition and psychiatric fields. And they were using high dosages of vitamins and minerals to treat all kinds of psychiatric and psychological conditions. And then they started applying this to other areas. So there's orthomolecular nutrition for a variety of illnesses. And they've met all sorts of regulatory hurdles and things like that because it upsets the current in vogue pharmaceutical industrial complex that has a stranglehold both on funding and in regulation at the government level, because there's big money in drugs and not big money in nutrition. And so we were always fighting that uphill battle inside of that. Now, one of the things that they determined is that to get super physiological dosages to get these benefits is that you had to take an increasing dosage until you broke the GI barrier. In other words, you get the runs. And so the most famous protocols was probably vitamin C. And anyone who's done high dosage vitamin C would experience that. So we said, well, why don't we try that with magnesium? So we spent a lot of time on the toilet by just increasing the dosage with each one. And in our very rude and crude experimentation, we found that if you took a single type of magnesium, just one type of magnesium, you would break the GI barrier much sooner than if you took 2 different kinds. And then we went 3 different kinds and 4 different kinds because we didn't know which one was really getting absorbed. And then we would correlate it with SpectraCell tests because SpectraCell is a great way to see if it's actually getting utilized and absorbed by the body. So after a bunch of experiments, we came up with a variety of forms, which came down to 7. And then we started tweaking the amount of those because different magnesiums the theory is, and we don't know for sure, it's a theory, whether by the bond that it has. So if you have glycinate or malate or orotate, it really refers to the bond that's attached to the magnesium to keep it stable. Well, we ascertained that maybe that has a different molecular size, maybe it has a different absorption rate, maybe it interacts with the microbiome differently. We didn't really know, but we found that if we took these 7, we could get a better result than if we took 1 or 2 or 3. So we put those together, and then a serendipitous meeting in Croatia happened where we got in contact with a microbiology lab at the Birch International University. Matt happened to be visiting there with a friend who was running some of his IT, and so he met the head of the department. And he's like, well, could we do some experiments to see what happens if we test all these nutrients? She goes, oh, yeah, we could certainly cultivate that. So we developed a partnership with them. Now we have, I think it's somewhere around 20 PhDs and master students who literally we bought a whole bunch of equipment for the university, which increased the amount of enrollees to the university by 30 or 40% now, because now they had the best facilities in the area and they could do tests that would allow them to provide PhD papers and this sort of thing. So they were excited. We were excited. We could get testing at a fraction of the cost we could at a big university, say here in the United States. And they had the equipment that allowed them to advance their students. That was a great relationship, and it's ongoing to this day. And we found out more things. We even improved the formulations. We found out things that, magnesium changes how your microbiome works. They start producing new antioxidants and new phytochemicals that you didn't anticipate. We can also test for things like genotoxicity and cytotoxicity, because if you have contaminants that slip past the lab assay or elements that aren't necessarily determined as contaminants, may disrupt how well a product is absorbed and utilized by the body. And then we went further and we got some testing information where we could actually look into see inside the cells if it was actually being absorbed. And since that time, we've upgraded the formulation, I think 4 times based on the research, because we always think that excellence is a destination. You never actually get there. It's a way of being. And so from that, we've been able to run a barrage of experiments on virtually all of our products. Number 1, to determine the effectiveness of raws, because it's not intuitive. Number 2, to get past the things that a third-party lab assay will never show. And number 3, to get into the actual cells to see if something's being absorbed. Now, because magnesium deficiency is so widespread, and I think the conditions of today, in other words, people being subjected to way higher levels of electromagnetic frequencies or electromagnetic pollution than we were before, that creates a drain on magnesium. Also, it's really hard to get it in the North American soil. Even if you have the perfect diet, you're probably not getting enough. And certainly not on optimal performance side. Our company's called Bioptimizers because we're always looking at what's optimum, not maximum, not minimum, what's optimum. So the RDA is like minimum amounts. Maximum is what maybe a high performance athlete's using because they're in extreme conditions, but the general public fits somewhere in the optimal level. And from that, magnesium turned out to be a runaway superstar product for us simply because so many people are deficient. It's involved in over 300 different items. Some people say 600. We know for sure it's at least 300 different metabolic processes inside the body. And when we get our testimonials back, that's evident. Because we get everything from, sleep improvement, blood sugar regulation, the reduction of pain, the elimination of PMS cramps, right? Increased resistance to stress, the ability to handle stimulants better, the ability to have electromagnetic pollution environments available. Why all this? Because of the unique elements of the magic mineral magnesium, and having more of the right magnesiums in the right amount seems to deliver a better result. Because you can take less to get more, and you can take more to get more, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, that's definitely, yes. And when you have magnesium, you brought all these together. And that's one thing, Wade, I really do appreciate about the product, is because it is research, but I love your philosophy because, and not to talk about myself, but we've, even in the realm I am, like even in Chinese medicine, I went into it knowing that I would be a slow go in my life. I know, like, to build your name, to try to do your best, as like, well, it's not going to be overnight. Thankfully, now it's like you see like that effect, like the snowball effect, where it can grow more and more. And now I know you are too, and I get as busy as I can. I can't even keep up sometimes. But when it comes to supplements, and to see a line like this that you've researched as heavily and see the results, because anybody that I put on this magnesium literally tell me that they've taken other magnesiums and they're like, I don't know how this works so well, but this, like, I've taken this magnesium and I can feel it in my body. And when you went through the research, like, and you started to compound it, I know you've seen so many things about how it's affected your, with clients coming back and telling you, but what do you think when you chose when you chose to make the magnesium, you chose to make the enzymes, what were the things you were seeing in culture that sort of motivated you? Like you started like less sleep or something. How did you get directed to go and get magnesium? Because I know you did the research, but were there things in culture that popped out at you and you just focused in on it?
Yeah, well, I like to look, I'm a little different. Most people focus on the differences of elements. I always look for common threads. In other words, what's common elements? And when I looked at what are the challenges that our clients are facing, our society's failing, we're seeing, like America, for example, is the most sleep-deprived population in the world. Mm-hmm. Heart disease is number one. Diabetes is number 4 in causes of death. Medical error being number 3, I think now. In other words, you're treating some of the earlier things that you didn't get in your nutrition, and now you've had some poor contraindication or weird reaction to the drug stacks that you're on. And that leads to a variety of complications. And what I noticed is that when it came down to, I always say that the body is going to work perfectly when you provide the elements that's given to it. Mm-hmm. And if it doesn't have those elements, it goes to kind of secondary and third rate elements that may be less efficient or less effective, but it will get by. And I think what has been accepted in the last 40 or 50 years in America is a level of, quote unquote, when you go to your doctor, normal health, which should never be accepted. And I'm going to go back to 2003. Professor Oshansky in the New England Journal of Medicine said, yes, at that time, people are living longer than ever in our life, but their disability adjusted life expectancy is 60 years old. In other words, they expect you to be on some sort of debilitating condition, pharmaceutical interaction, or a compromised form of life for the last 20 years of your life. He also predicted that life expectancy would start to go down because the wave of poor or suboptimal health was increasing exponentially, and he expected that children have a lower life expectancy. Well, fast forward 20 years later, that's exactly correct. Children today are expected to live not as long as their parents. They're developing adult-based diseases earlier. So where does this trace back to? Well, it traces back to what we call nutrition. And we've been given a model of protein, fats, carbohydrates, as our model to work from, our nutritional facts panel. But none of this had to do with nutrient density. Now, I grew up in a rural area, and my mom had an organic garden. Wow. We used to make fun of her because she didn't put fertilizers or chemicals or bugs spray on it or anything like that. But when I went to university, I had my first aha, and I was like, wait a second, I'm eating some of the same food I eat at home, but it doesn't taste the same, and I don't feel the same when I eat it. And then I would come home in the summer, and I would eat the same food, and I would feel better, and I would feel stronger. And I said, what's going on here? I said, maybe there's something to this whole organic nutrient thing, because at that time, the professors are like, yeah, whatever, it doesn't matter. All that stuff is a bunch of bunk. We just need to increase yield. Mm-hmm. And so if you go back, I did some more research, and it turned out that in the 1940s, I think about 95% of the population had access to local grown produce that was done through traditional means of growing, which meant that they had a 7-year cycle. They would crop rotate, and then 1 year you would grow hemp, plow the hemp back into the soil, which is a rejuvenative aspect, and then you let it have a year for the microbes to start growing and extracting the mineral elements. Now, when after World War II, everybody started moving to the cities, manufacturing exploded, industry exploded, tertiary elements exploded. And so the government's like, well, how are we going to feed all these people? So they started creating governing bodies out of need to create large conglomerates of food production, and people went to monoculture farming. Well, that was solved one problem, but then they couldn't get enough yield because they didn't have the nutrients in. So then they started adding fertilizer. When you add fertilizer, you grow the crop better, but the nutrient content inside of it is much less. And then they had to start using herbicides, pesticides, and fungicides because the plants were essentially weaker. They had poorer immune systems. They weren't resistant to funguses and bacteria and all sorts of things they were subjecting it to. And so fast forward, 80 years later, well, guess here we are of multi-generational nutritional deficiency because of poor quality food, plus the added elements that are added into our diet, which has no place being in there, which also mimic essential minerals. So there's a great book by Eric Schlosser, and it's called Fast Food Nation. And so the development of nutrient substances that mimic nutrients that made you consume more of it. Okay, because what happened is by that time in the 70s, basically there was only a few big manufacturing conglomerates that had a stranglehold on the whole food distribution industry. So if you spend more money on marketing, you only took from the other 2 or 3 competitors in the marketplace. You weren't increasing. So they needed to find a way to get people to eat more. And by adding these elements, stripping away essential minerals, like a great question would be like enriched bread. They take everything out of it, bleach it all out, add vitamin D and call it enriched. Okay? People in the 1500s were living on bread. Well, how were they doing it? Well, the protein content in bread back then was way higher. The nutrient quality was way higher in these ancient grain foods, these ancient crops that we were traditionally eating. Well, you eat the same thing nowadays. It's not the same thing. It's got the same name, but what's underneath the surface is way different. And anyone that's gone to, say, Europe and had non-genetically modified like pasta products, I've seen people that have massive gluten allergies here go to Europe, eat pasta every day, lose weight and feel great, and come back and then they get infected. So what's going on there? Yeah. Well, it turns out disruption of the microbiome to chemicals, lack of nutrients inside of it, lack of the key enzymes and probiotics that make your microbiome work properly, and a complete devoid of key elements that keep you satiated. So taking all those things apart over many years and listening to lots of great mentors, understanding the role of regulation, government, traditional practices, pharmaceutical industrial complex, big agri, all of these elements. Now, I'm not trying to create a conspiracy about it. That the job of those companies is to produce food and to make a reward on their shareholders. And shareholders wanting to do that, you make decisions based on shareholders. And so when you get into those large conglomerate components, you start to lose essence as the spreadsheet guys aren't listening to the old 85-year-old guy that's been growing crops in the field since he was a child and passed on from, generation to generation. And so when you talk to those guys and you talk to the other guys, you seem to see where the gap is. And this is why essential nutritional supplementation has to go part and parcel with a real whole food diet. Because even if you're eating a real whole food diet, you still might not be able to get those elements. This is where magnesium comes in. So magnesium is involved in over 300 different processes inside of the body. And the bioavailability of that magnesium determines how much you get. Second is if you don't have it, some of these things aren't going to work very well. So you have to use step down regulation. So, and the problem is most people have never really ate real food, how it tastes. And I would suggest to anybody, if you don't believe what I'm saying, go to like a Mennonite or an Amish farm that have been using traditional practices with their traditional seeds passed down through multi-generations, not ones that come in genetically modified stuff that you have to buy every year, but the actual original stuff. You eat a tomato or a cucumber or a potato there, you have one item and like you're full, you're satiated because of the nutrient density.
Wow.
The reality is most of us don't have access to that on a day-to-day basis. So we need to eat the best that we can, create a high satiety-based diet in order to maintain our health and our vitality, but then start looking at the elements, and we can determine that through genetic testing, SpectraCell testing, various tests that you can do on an analysis with the guidance of a doctor such as yourself and say, okay, here's some of the elements that you're missing, because you and I might be able to take the same amount of magnesium, but maybe there's something that is slowing down my absorption rate of that magnesium. So we're going to need a different rate. So that's how we led to the conclusion of first optimize the digestion so that we're getting the transport of the things that we need. Because you're not feeding your cells. It's a single canal from the mouth to the bum. And it's the microbiome in there that's going to convert what we eat into the building blocks or energy units of our life, as well as removing the waste. And if you have a disruption in your microbiome, you have a disruption in your absorption rates, you're producing a lot of things that maybe put an increased toxic load on the body, and you got to clean that up first and then get the other things. But magnesium, simple, fast, easy. And when you take it, people go, oh, wow, I'm sleeping better. Oh, wow, I don't need as much insulin. Oh, wow, I'm not feeling that restless leg syndrome. Or not feeling overstimulated from, either whether television or caffeine or these other stimulants that we're subjected to today.
That's, I think, the bioavailability to me when you're working with the patient is the true mark of a good product. And I say that because over the years, it's been a little over 20 years working on patients, you try to find your favorite ones. And when you find your favorite ones, you never want to leave. And one thing I really love about yours is the cleanliness. When you say it's bioavailable and it helps the gut, could you talk us through a bit like how you chose, like, I guess, who manufactures, how you manufacture it, the cleanliness of the product, and how well it can be absorbed?
Yeah. So I'll break down a little bit of the inside of the nutritional supplement industry. So if for whatever reason, and this happens a lot nowadays because of social media, various products, ingredients will catch a trend. And in other words, a famous celebrity takes magnesium and says, wow, I got these results. And all of a sudden magnesium uptake goes through the roof, or took vitamin C or whatever or this fatty acid or whatever it happened to be. And what happens is there are two groups of people inside the nutritional industry. There are those who are in it to make a profit, and there's nothing wrong with making a profit, but they're making a profit based not on serving the customer. They're looking at, magnesium's hot right now. Hey, Bob, let's put together a magnesium product. Let's call up a bunch of co-mans. Let's call up a bunch of raw suppliers. And so raws are companies around the world that harvest or extract, herbs, nutritional products. There's a process. You just don't, like, magnesium just doesn't grow on its own. It comes in the thing, and you have to create it, extract it, whatever, bond it. That's why you have all those different bonds. And then they give it to you. They sell it to you, and you can put it in your ingredient. And some people will make a white label ingredient. That's what I call the mishmash or maybes of this.
Yeah.
And they say, oh, we've got 7 magnesiums, or we got 3 magnesiums, or we got this new thing that's better than everybody else. There is no proof, no element, nothing to it. But they're great marketers. They're very convincing. They might use a celebrity influencer, etc. Okay. Then underneath that, you got, you have what's called a lab assay. So a lab assay is basically you can get an internal lab assay or a third party. Most people say you need third party testing. So what a lab assay will determine, does it have this element in it?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Does it have this magnesium in it? And what are the contaminants in it? What are the acceptable level of contaminants and unacceptable contaminants? So microplastics or other toxic materials that may be present due either to the extraction process or from the actual growing conditions. A couple examples of that is like if you look at chocolate. If a chocolate is in a volcanic area versus a non-volcanic area like the cacao beans, the volcanic chocolate may contain higher levels of what's considered toxic elements that would violate, say, California Prop 65 and groups. They say, oh, it's got too much cadmium in it. Now, whether that amount of cadmium would kill you or not is debatable, but that wouldn't pass a lab assay, say, in California, but it would in Nebraska. Okay? So you can either get your lab assay in a favorable place, or you can get a lab assay that says it's okay, but you have no idea if that actually produces a response in the biology. You just know it has this much magnesium. And here's the crazy part when you get into this. I've seen elements that will say it's 100% of this, and I've seen things as low as 20% of the item you're looking for.
Really?
And I've seen results where the 100% has no biological activity and the 20% is totally active. And you're going, how do you sort this stuff out?
Yeah.
And that's where our microbiology lab came in, because what they can do is they can run the next level of testing. Genotoxic and cytotoxic. Is there some reaction in the cells that cause a toxic response, or is there some aspect that implements a potential mutation in your genes? Right? So those are the two elements that you're looking for. So you can pass that test. Then you can see, what is the bacteria cultures doing when you put this product into the mix? When you get into the number one test in the world is called the InfoGest, which is you'll actually look at how something gets utilized by the microbiome. What do these bacteria cultures produce? What nutrients, what elements, what energy units, what building blocks? Does it cross into the intestinal tract? And then there's I forget the name of it. It's this atomic electron microscope. I forget the term, where you actually can look in the cell and see if the stuff gets in there or not.
Oh, wow. What is
Yeah,
it?
so
an atomic? Okay,
I got to research this. Atomic electrospectrograph. I forget that. I always mess up the name. It's like supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. We got these, and we bought one for the university because they were like, this is the only way we can really test, and almost nobody has one of these machines. And I'm like, well, if we have one, then could you do these tests? The master students were doing the happy dance because they were like, oh, wow, we're going to be able to do PhD papers on this and get our PhDs because now we can prove what maybe someone else hasn't been able to prove in previous research.
Yes.
Long story short, when we have all those elements, then you can determine, number one, combinations of elements. Does that enhance? Does that have a synergistic effect, or does it have a detrimental effect? Is there elements that you don't anticipate? Are there new elements being produced when you combine elements together? Like certain delivery agents may improve the magnesium take. How you wrap it. Is it wrapped in a liponanid particle? Is it not wrapped? We don't do this just with magnesium. We do this with all of our products.
Wow.
So that gives us a level of research that I think, and our goal is to be able to stand toe to toe with the pharmaceutical industrial complex in the not too distant future and say, no, actually, we are able to produce reputable results, prevent illness and disease or dysfunction or suboptimal symptoms, and provide a level of health to allow you to live longer, stronger, and a better life for an extended period of time. And that's the mission that we're on. We want to live long. We want to live strong. We want to live a better life. And you do that if you have your vital and your health. And all you need to do is make sure that you're providing the essential elements and then balancing those elements together in a way that contributes to your unique individual constitution. And that's where people like yourself come in. As you know, You go to Chinese medicine is a great example. You got like the 5 different types of types, and then there's hot and cold and wet and dry and all of these elements, which are very common in Chinese culture. Same thing if you go to Ayurvedic, you got the 3 doshas, and the variability on that, right? And so these were well known in cultures that have existed for thousands of years and totally not within the consciousness of North America. So we thought, let's take the best of the East, and then we're going to take the best of the West with this scientific experimentation, combine those two, and either validate or disprove assumptions that are made in the industry. So now the entire nutritional supplement industry, I think, is on the greatest uptrend ever. I think you're going to see the same thing happen in agricultural standards for what qualitates good food versus not good food, and the reduction of disruptive elements from our food supply. And I think when we do that, we're going to turn that downward trajectory on life expectancy and compromised life expectancy upwards. I think we're going to get a 20% gain over the next 20 years. And why do I say that? I want to qualify this. One of my friends is Dr. Horst Filzer, who was the first surgeon to put a stent in the body. So we were having a conversation one day, and he says, you know what's amazing? He said, back when he did that way back in the day, he said, open heart surgery, you got to open up this whole cavity. It's a 6 months recovery, right? My dad a few years ago had that surgery that he was talking about, and he was out in 2 days.
Wow.
His recovery was 2 days because, there's less interruption, because he says, surgeons, we do damage. We're just trying to take the, disruptive element out of the body, and then the body heals itself. He says, I have no idea. I just go back and watch it heal itself. So I knew I was just trying to remove the problem and let the body fix itself.
Yeah.
And I was always interested, like, well, what makes the body fix itself? Going back to bodybuilding, you're putting a stress, you're doing some damage, and then there's a regrowth, and there's an optimal amount that you do. You do too much, you don't grow. You don't do enough, you do too much. If you lower your calories too far, you lose muscle. If you lower them enough, you lose body fat, but not muscle. If you do too much, you increase body fat. So I was playing with those things in early life. So it became second nature, same as my business partner, Matt. And so that's led to the development of our company. And of course, now we have the changing HHS director, which covers pharmaceutical, covers agriculture, covers funding at university, and all these elements. So we're entering into what I think is going to be the golden age of health in the history of not just the United States, because the United States drives the entire market. Right now, AI, robotics, and health are seen as, from the investment folks, as the 3 areas that will continue to grow, even in the if we're in the nature of depression or a downturn in the markets, a bear market. They see those industries increasing because of our capabilities, our capacity to prove it, and also the public's demand for better health, and the lack of, or the loss of authority and credibility over the last 4 or 5 years, I think, have led up to this changing tide in the industry, which is the first time in my industry. So I'm really excited to be, working with guys such as yourself, who are out there on the front lines providing, key personalized information to people so they understand the nuances of their own body, what supplements right for them, what's not right for them, what diet's right for them, what's not right for them, and how to systematically take out maybe challenges they might be experiencing in a way that makes sense physiologically, because these are complex processes that you're dealing with. You need a lot of expertise in order to handle it.
I couldn't agree more, Wade. I love, like you said, how it's going into a direction that I'm excited about as well. I think that as much scrutiny as some of the health field or in the natural health field has had over the last few years, we did an interview with Dr. McCary, and he's one of the head guys that may be taking lead at FDA. And you look at how standards have been in the past, but now they can have more insight into, like you said, the food, the agricultural aspect of it. And that alone makes me super excited. Then you have your supplements. We have things added on that's going to actually like bring the health of our nation back up and the whole world. So I'm so excited. And so with this though, Wade, where do you see, you say it's going to be trajectory is going to go up, even in the moments of depression. Where do you see Bioptimizers going? Like, as in, do you have like, I'll say new trajectories, or do you have like a different direction or this steady stream of where you're going now?
Yeah. So we do this. Matt and I have been doing this for 20 years. Mm-hmm. And we have what's called a vision traction organizer. It comes out of the EOS operating system. And how do you chart a course? And you'll have a 10-year, and you move back to a 3-year, and you move back to a 1-year, and then you break it down into quarterly 90-day sprints towards what your objectives are. Wow. And every year you got to keep updating that. And it's a great way. And that I related to that because that's what I did in bodybuilding. I said, okay, I competed at the Mr. Universe. I got to win the national championship. To win the national championship, I got to win a provincial championship. To win a provincial championship, I need to meet a local championship. To win the local championship, I got to get some muscles, right? And that means down to today, I got to work out. I got to eat right. And I got to systematically apply some sort of process in order to move this. And then I got to keep tweaking that process as I move towards my goal. So I have always thought in that type of, here's the goal. Let's move backwards till I get tangible actions that I can do today, measure their results, and continue to adjust along the pathway. And ideally get some really good insight from someone who's done that path before that can provide me nuances that I may never discover through trial and error. And that's where coaching comes in particularly. And I was a coach for many, many years. I love coaching, and I still have coaches for myself to cut the learning curve. You know, essentially they've done the 10,000 experiments. I can just extract the nuggets and apply them. And then, you know, it's just slow. It speeds things up.
Yes. And
so we've applied that to our industry. Now, what are we into? Neurofeedback is a big one that we've been doing. We have a process called metamorphosis. We can change people's IQs, EQs inside of a week. We can develop neurological capabilities they didn't have before. For example, recently in my last training, we had noticed that I had a slower response on my right ear to my left ear, which can create confusion when you're hearing information.
Yes.
And to just as a simple example, I would listen to podcasts at 1.5 speed. And if I went over 1.5 speed, I would start not picking up the information. I would skip things or miss things. So I could never go past one. So I've been training my brain on that particular pathway to my right ear to improve the neurological speed. And guess what? I was able to do it. Now I listen to podcasts at 2.0 and I completely understand everything. Even in fast speakers, I can pick it up and feel the separation. When communicating, I now have the ability, when I communicate, it feels like I have more time between the words so that I can formulate the right word at the right space without doing because when you're doing that, what that's saying is that you don't have enough processing speed from your cognitive process to your voice production process. So you have a delay. And that's one of the markers I watch, because when you go back to training, it's like every now and then you start, as those start to creep into my speech, I know, it's time to go back for another training because I'm starting to get a little rusty on that. Just like if I didn't throw a football every day, suddenly I can't make the out throw anymore. You know, it's going wide or left or throw it in the dirt. Not because I don't have the ability, it's because I haven't been working that ability on a regular basis to keep that neural pathway, that connection solid. So that's one area that we're working on. We have a book called Sick to Superhuman, which we outline a variety of the methods that we have done to be able to literally reverse aging. So, and aging is relative to the decline of your physiological functions due to oxidative damage over time, which we call aging. So we've been able to invert that through a variety of processes with one of our advocates, Katrine. She does customized. We do, genetic testing, screening, all that sort of stuff. We look at each person, and then we rebuild the elements that are causing the most inflammation or the most damage inside of the tissues of the body. And then we can actually reverse that in often cases. Because if you give the body the elements it needs, it will fix them. Yes. So that's a very exciting field that we're into. Also nootropics. Because today, the next 5 or 10 years, and if you listen to the futurists talk, they're talking about AI, quantum computing, they're talking about robotics. So the world is not going to look anything like we imagine. It's going to look more like Star Wars.
Wow.
And with all of this increase of technological information, and I'll refer to Brett and Heather Weinstein, who run a great podcast called Dark Horse Podcast, and they are evolutionary biologists. And one of the things they said was the unique thing that's happened in the last 100 years is that technological advancement is now outpacing biological capability to adapt to that. So Darwin is often misquoted. He said it's survival of the fittest. It's survival of the most adaptable, if you read the whole story about the blue-footed bluebee bird. Okay?
Yep.
It's interesting. So it's not survival of the fittest. It's survival of the most adaptable. So as we go into an increasing technological evolution, the fact that we communicate with these screens, we have blue lights, we have EMS. I like the world. I like the convenience. I like all the technology and stuff. Let's be clear. I can learn from the greatest minds in the world with my little phone at any second for virtually no cost. This has not happened. Yeah. The problem is there's more things to learn, and you can get paralysis analysis of discerning so much information that you become a consumer more than you're a producer, and from a time perspective. And that's a major problem for people because you're getting snippets of information in a lot of areas, but you don't know how to synchronize, just like I couldn't synchronize what my university professors were telling me because they were in these compartmentalized feeds. I had a bunch of information, but I couldn't synthesize it into producing the result I wanted.
Yeah.
Well, it's the same thing in anybody's life. So getting ahead of the curve, improving our capacity to handle the increased cognitive load, to increase our cognitive capability. So we developed a whole line of nootropics, a company called Nootopia. And we've got a ton of new ventures that I can't speak about that we're foraging into at a pretty ferocious rate because, more money in my life isn't going to make any difference. I'm a very simple guy. I'm eating beans and rice and salad every day.
Yeah.
Protein powder. My life is real simple. Like it hasn't changed. I have a nicer car in the garage that I don't drive because I walk most places. I only take it for, extended trips. So my life really hasn't changed that much from when I was flat broke, not running anything at 20 years old to running a large multinational corporation with, staff in 29 different countries. Well, what's changed? My responsibilities have changed. My mistakes are much more costly at that level than it was then. And my ability to synthesize information from a wide variety of angles has to improve in order to meet the stewardship demands that the business does. And so we've been really working on how do we increase our capacity to make better decisions, faster decisions, to look at openings in the market. And that is, there's a need that's not being filled, and we think that we can fill it better than anyone else. And then our ability to attract, hire, and integrate world-class people in that field that will allow us to take the principles and culture we've developed at the company and put that into that new field and able to produce excellence in a variety of areas. And so that's our Bioptimizer's mission. So we've been on it forever, and we'll continue on it as long as, God allows us.
I know that, and truly my heart of hearts, so Wade, it's like that your company is just going to keep thriving and keep going, and because you can tell the passion in your voice. And one thing I really appreciate is how you talked about the stewardship of where you're going to take the ship. And so when you have to steward something, because you can see it in your eyes, and that you want to see people get better. And you're right, like you can make all the money, but again, it's like you can tell when people have been in the health field for a long time, you can just say it's their passion. It's like, I just want to see people to improve and just excel and have more vitality. And that's one thing like I really appreciate about Bioptimizers. And this may sound kind of a little unusual, but doing Chinese medicine all these years, truly, like you kind of get used to, and I know you can too. You can feel the chi of somebody. You can feel kind of the movement around somebody. And then I know you can, I can tell, like, but when you pick up a product, you can almost feel the energy in the product. You go, not only is it a good product, but it has good intention too behind it. And that's one thing. The first time I saw your guys' product, I was like, that's got energy, like true energy. And anybody watching this, I want you guys to know that this is what I recommend. This is the magnesium that it's helped my little Korean mama. And I'm telling you, when my little Korean mama can be helped by a supplement, I always say, you need to pay attention. So I'm grateful. I'm thankful. I can't wait for the nootropics. I'm telling you, that's one of the things I would love to. So when it comes time, I want you to come back on. We want to talk about it again. Talk about that. And I'm just thankful for your time, Wade. Thank you I know you're a busy guy and you have a big schedule, and I'm just so thankful that I'm able to like talk with you about this. And I'm so grateful that you came on the show today.
Well, thank you so much. And, it's funny you should mention that. I'm glad you mentioned the energetics. We sell a ton of stuff online. I still like going to stores, nutrition stores, and I literally walk by the aisles and I feel the energy of the product. Then I go, what's this?
Yes.
And I might not have any idea what that is. I'll go buy it right there because I feel the energy of it. And there's another thing that I feel the energy of, and we share this. My favorite thing, we have a group meeting with all our staff across the world every second week. And we read out the testimonials that come to us to Bioptimizers because I want to connect everybody to the mission. There's nothing, and I know as a doctor, I'm sure you're addicted to this. There's nothing better in life when you're able to reach out and help someone who's struggling with something and fix that problem. The gratitude and energy, which leads me to this final piece before we go, I guess. We're probably running near our time. It's
all right. It's all right.
I believe that we are single cells in the human body throughout all of time, imagining humanity as a singular organism. And I'm one little cell in that, and I have a job to do, and everybody has their different jobs, like a liver cell or a brain neuron or, a kidney cell or a muscle cell. They all do their function. And I've always wondered, like, why do I feel good when someone else gets a result? And the only thing I can correlate is because we're part of this large human family. And that cell-to-cell exchange that we see working in the body is also representative in our day-to-day interactions with people. So we are all connected. We all are doing different elements of that. And that's why everybody jumps up simultaneously in a football field when someone scores an amazing touchdown or does a great play. How do we all respond exactly the same at the same moment?
Yes.
Because we're connected by something that is outside our little individual life or individual problems or individual challenges. And there's something about that connectivity that makes us feel alive and makes us feel good. And I believe that's the chi of the energy flowing through all of us, and that comes out. And that's just a great way to frame life, frame people, and to frame our mission. And that's how we look at it. And that's why we're here to do what we do. Trying to be the best little cells we can be.
I'm telling you, I love it. Right now, I love that analogy. That's what I'm saying. Like, all part of the great. Like, whatever happens on the micros happen in the macro, and vice versa. And I'm with you. I can't believe how much you like. That's how similar I am. I'll see something and I'll go there and I'll go, that's good energy. I'm going to try to take that and I'm going to buy it. I don't even know what it's about. And I feel the same way. There is nothing better to feel as a practitioner whenever you don't. It's not to get a pat on the back, but it's just so life-giving when you see somebody else starting to heal and to prosper because of something that you're able to help with. And I'm with you. And so I want everybody out there to check out Bioptimizers. And Wade, we always ask this at the end, like, where can we find you? I know we have you on Instagram and on your website, but can you tell us where we can find you guys?
Yeah, well, of course, if you use the Doctor Motley code, you go to bioptimizers.com, use Doctor Motley, they'll get a minimum of 10% discount. If they buy larger quantities, they get a bigger discount. But we have a great Awesome Health course on the site. A lot of people like it. It's called the 84 Days. Basically, I walk people through a framework of looking at health, and we don't get into supplements till way late in it. It's air, water, exercise, sunlight, optimizers, mental beliefs and attitudes, education, testing, and coaching. That's the awesome acronym. And then I give illustrations of things that I've learned along the way that can apply to meet both the minimum and eventually the optimal levels of activity or productive pastimes to do. So you can get that at the site. It's free. We're on Facebook and Instagram. And then I have the Awesome Health Podcast. I'll have to get you on the Awesome Health Podcast. I'll let Vita know about that, where I interview experts in a wide variety of fields, other nutrition companies. I bring them on and everything, because we don't solve everybody's problem. And I find somebody that's doing something good. I'm like, hey, come on the show. I want to tell people about it. Yes. Because we're all in this game of life together.
I'm with you, and I'd love to be on it. And I'm with you. I'm going to chew on that analogy, though. Like you say, we're all one small cell in a big body of humanity. I've got to think about that. I will chew on that. And we're so grateful and we're so thankful. So I want everybody out there to truly, if you are wondering about magnesium nootropics, they have a great protein powder, they have enzymes, please, you can visit my site and I can tell you where to go, but he's already told you where to go. So we're all behind you, Wade, and we really appreciate you being here. So from everybody here at the Ancient Health Podcast, we appreciate it, and I hope everybody out there has a great day. Thanks so much.